what data do you think is important? Hey, I'm Mike.
Hi, I'm Eric.
And welcome to our podcast,
Cyber Sitrep.
It's right, where you get all the situational information you need on cybersecurity topics.
Yep.
So tonight we're bringing you...
Let's see, what are we doing? Oh, dude, where's your critical data?
Yeah, where'd it go?
Critical data? What does that mean?
Do you even know if you have critical data? I get one of two responses usually when I'm talking to clients or potential clients. I'm like, what data do you think is important? And what do you think my two answers are?
You don't get an answer. It would be my first response, right? You get crickets. That's usually what we get.
Yeah, I usually hear, no, I don't have critical data.
Oh, yeah,
all my
right.
data is just who needs it, who wants it.
The
and
whole
the other one
security
is
ostrich syndrome,
yeah,
right?
Nothing I have anyone would want.
Right.
And the other answer is all of it.
Oh, yeah.
Every
true.
piece
Good,
of it.
Good point. Yeah, I always forget that one. Oh, everything's critical.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to protect all my data. And I'm like, so the Christmas party, that email, as important as your payroll. I got you.
Yeah, so let's go back to critical data real quick, Mike, and why we think it's so important. I mean, obviously people are important, buildings not so important, right? So if something were to happen to those pillars of your business, would you be able to recover in a timely fashion, right? And obviously we're not saying that people aren't important; they are. But we would argue just as important is your critical data, because without that, and so I guess we should start with what the definition of critical data is, right? But without that critical data, your organization can't continue to function, which I believe that would be the definition, right, of critical data.
And to your point about people, we pay different levels of employees different pay.
Right.
Because they have different levels of importance and need and requirement in the company.
Exactly.
So your data, very similarly, has levels of importance.
Oh, I like what you did there. That was clever. It was clever,
thanks.
kind of easing into that not all data is created equal. And
that's right.
We'll get into that in a little bit more in just a second. That's awesome. Plus, when it comes to personnel, we don't want a single point of failure, right? And I understand, especially as a small business, Mike mentions many times wear multiple hats. I totally understand that, but wherever you can, try to eliminate those single points of failure, right? And that's the same thing we want to do with our critical data as well. See, I stuck that in there as well.
Where do we store it? But before we know and care where we store it, what is it?
Right. So let's start with that. So once again, critical data, Mike, from your perspective.
For me, critical data is something that each organization has to really figure out, and it's data top to bottom. Not only what keeps your operation running, mm-hmm. but more of who may use that data, what will happen if that data is lost, gone, or unavailable.
Gotcha.
Recent tabletop with a client, and I said, what are we going to do for the recall of your personnel now that you're offline, you have a denial of service? And they're like, oh, we have a recall roster.
Oh,
and I'm like,
that's
awesome.
Cool. That's
Where
great.
is it? And they go, on our SharePoint. And I said, well, we just realized the SharePoint was inaccessible. What are you going to do now? And they went, oh my God.
Right.
That's important data. We need to have multiple backups, including a hard copy.
Right. Wow.
So it's going through that kind of data stack and finding out what is important to you. And critical, can your company function without it?
Right. Yeah, I like to get it down to the keep it simple, stupid method, the KISS method, right? If it's data that your organization can't survive without, to me, that's critical. Now, granted, there's a lot more nuance there, but that's, once again, for me, primal brain, let's just get it down to brass tacks, right?
Exactly.
So, so business data that we can't live without in our organization. Once again, depending on the size of the organization, that may be a one-day exercise to determine what that data is. It could be, multiple months, especially if you're a large organization or you're a small organization that's been around for a really long time and have done a lot of different projects, and you've got a lot of data floating around there that's 20, 30 years old. Believe it or not, we have customers that have that. Think a lot of contractors that have to keep that data.
Yep. What are your data retention requirements?
Exactly, right?
That's
From
important.
your customer, et cetera, right? All that boils down into it. So that's why we think it's important that we go over this today, right? Is that at a minimum, regardless of the size of your company, whether you're one person or we're saying small and medium businesses.
Yeah.
So if you're up to 1,000 plus, it's for everybody, right? I'm just being cheeky.
Yeah.
You need to identify that critical data. And for those of you that have the benefit of being newer into the industry and being super small, get in front of it now, be proactive, much easier to do up front than trying to go back and do this after the fact, right?
Oh, we'll get into, discussing how we can protect that critical data, but one of the first things you have to do is that inventory of the data.
Oh, yes.
So to Eric's point, if you're new, start now. Now is the time to start tagging and knowing and understanding your data before you have 400,000 files that you have to go through.
And gigabytes or terabytes of data, right? So, Mike, you mentioned something really, really interesting. I think it's critical for critical data is tagging.
Tagging your data.
So let's talk about tagging.
So yeah, tagging for me is important. It's part of your data loss protection DLP strategy, regardless of what product you may use to help you with that. If you're in a simple Microsoft Office 365, like a lot of us are, or even in Google Workspace, you can tag your data with meta tags saying company confidential. And then you can assign rules to that, which might say company confidential, cannot email outside of the company email.
Right. Okay.
So that's just small little steps. But again, I say we start with our inventory, find that data, but then as we're discovering it, we put these tags in place. And then to your point, then we figure out what are those rules? What do we want to do?
Right.
Because it's one thing to just say I tagged it all, but so what?
Sure. But if you haven't tagged your data, then how are you going to know what's critical and what's not, right?
Exactly.
It'll get out of scope really, really quick. So tagging is critical if you have the ability to do that in your environment. If you have the technology, definitely do that. It'll make your life a lot easier. Now, I will say on that, though, once again, you can get crazy with the amount of levels you create, right, for your data. Because what if it's not critical? Maybe it's, confidential. Maybe it's sensitive, et cetera. Got to be careful, or we don't want to use DoD terms necessarily, but it could also be CUI data, right? Which is a whole other series
controlled, unclassified
information, right? That you hold on behalf of the government customer. We definitely have to account for that. So tagging is a good way to identify that critical data in our environment. And then to your point with inventory, we can do searches for those tags and easily identify what we have said is critical in our environment, right?
Exactly. So knowing where your data is and what data you have is important, because we often talk about insider threats or the person in our small business that could ruin our business by leaving and taking all our client data and all those things.
Right.
So do we want that person to be able to email that home?
Exactly.
So it may seem like, well, no one's interested in me. No one wants my data. Small businesses are highly sought after from cyber criminals. I reckon that to my Ocean's 11. We've all seen the Ocean's 11 films. Big heist, right? People are spinning lots of wheels, lots of small moving parts. But when they get done, they get millions, and that makes the TV. We've seen that. We've seen those breaches on TV.
Exactly.
What we don't see is how many convenience stores were robbed last night, which were thousands. That's you, the small business owner. So if you think your data is not important, trust me, the little bit of data they can collect over a lot of different small businesses adds up, and that's going to be a payoff to them.
Gotcha. And in your environment, what makes sense. But once again, we know we need to back it up. Too long didn't read. We need to back it up multiple ways. But we also need to determine how volatile that critical data is, right, Mike?
Right.
Meaning, how often is it altered or changed? So if it's something like a tax return that you filed for the company, obviously that's static and it's not going to change. So maybe you don't need to back that up every day for a year. Maybe once a year would be okay, having that on an offline backup, right? But it's all about volatility, right?
Exactly. A lot of our files are changing on the daily.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure, and it's also your risk level. If you feel you can go 2 days of loss of that data and still be operational, and it's less expensive to back up every 2 days, do that. But find your groove, your battle rhythm, and know that data is always thought after. So protecting it both with backup, and then I would move into encryption.
Absolutely.
Making sure that that data, backed up and otherwise, has
Right.
some form of encryption on it, because then it's just nothing.
I
It
agree.
is no
Some
data.
type of data at rest encryption on there, which I think we'll talk about in yet another episode. We'll go into hardware versus software.
So we
data at
hope you
rest
see that
encryption.
we're going to keep
Got a
you
lot of
interested
topics
with a
here.
lot of topics coming your way. And we have a lot of crazy ideas.
We do. But, Mike, one thing you said at the beginning that I just want to reaffirm to everybody is that, and I wasn't thinking of it honestly until you brought it up, is that, the two default answers are nothing's critical and everything's critical. And, please don't be the everything is critical person as well, because that just doesn't scale very well in your environment, right? So once again, you can use Mike's nuanced definition, or you can use mine, you can't survive without it definition,
Right.
to determine what that subset of your data is. We've yet to see between ourselves and our customers someone that truly everything is critical in their environment. It just by virtue of data, it just hasn't happened, right? So not all data is protected or created equal, so it doesn't need to be protected equally. To Mike's point, I think once again, from a small and medium-sized business perspective, is spend the money doing the backups where you really need it and save the money where you don't.
Right. We all in small businesses are like penny pinchers. Right?
Absolutely.
We have to find the best value for the buck.
Yeah, we joke in our company that every penny counts twice, right? So, this is a way we can save money, right? Because to your point, Mike, backups can be fairly expensive depending on what strategy you go with, which, once again, in another episode, we're going to break that down a little bit more. So
yeah, it's very cost consuming if you try to protect everything. So
Right.
I always kind of look at those folks that say everything is important, and like you really don't want to put those protections everywhere.
Right.
It's not cost effective.
Yeah, exactly.
So understanding your data, knowing where your data lives,
Yeah.
that's critical.
Yeah, so I think that would be our closeout here, right? Is, we charge you to take a look at your environment, top to bottom, like you said, Mike, identify the data types you have in your environment, and then determine which of those types are critical, and then develop a backup strategy around that, right?
Yes.
Depending on what your individual circumstances are.
Exactly. And if you're a small business, they're like, well, how do I do this? Like we said earlier, find your data, see what it is, sit down, have a good hard look at it and say, this is important, or this can wait. And this, to your point, this doesn't change often. So we'll throw
Right.
it somewhere and just keep it there.
Exactly right. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in. And we'd like to thank the Studio 809 Community Podcast and Next Us facility here in beautiful downtown Colorado Springs for hosting us. And as usual, we will see you soon.
That's right. And remember to like us and tell your friends if you want to learn more about cybersecurity and your current SITREP.